So what happens when one of the most powerful trade groups in the world, the National Association of Realtors, just starts to fall apart? Not that long ago, this absolute titan of an industry was staring down a full-blown crisis. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the playbook of the leader they hired to pull off a massive corporate rescue mission. And the stakes? They couldn't have been higher. A race against irrelevance. I mean, those are the words of NAR's new CEO, Nykia Wright. And wow, do they capture the situation she walked into. This was never going to be about small tweaks. This was an all-out fight for the organization's very survival. So that really brings us to the core question of this whole story, right? When a giant organization, one with this much influence, starts to basically rot from the inside out, how do you even begin to fix it? That's the puzzle we're going to try and solve today. Okay, so before we can even get to the solution, you have to understand the sheer scale of the problem. This wasn't just about fighting legal battles with outsiders. The real problem, the deep crisis of confidence, was actually coming from within. Yeah, the trouble was coming from its own people. Think about it. A massive loss of faith was spreading like wildfire among its 1.5 million members. There were these public rumblings, as Wright later called them. You had pros starting to question why membership was even mandatory, pushing back against the organization's massive control over the industry. The very foundation was cracking. And look, when your foundation is cracking, you don't bring in someone to just patch up the drywall, right? You bring in an engineer. And in this case, NAR brought in a transformation expert from completely outside the real estate world, Nykia Wright. And this slide really says it all. It shows just how deliberate this shift in strategy was. For decades, NAR was led by industry insiders, the old guard. But Wright? Totally different. She was a media executive who had just steered the Chicago Sun-Times through its own messy transformation. They were hiring her for her real estate knowledge. They were hiring her because she knew how to turn a ship around. And this wasn't some big secret. The former NAR president, Tracy Casper, said it right out loud. The board knew they needed a fundamental, ground-up transformation, and they hired a leader whose entire career was built on doing exactly that. Her being an outsider wasn't a bug, it was the main feature. So with that mission in hand, Wright did not waste a single second. Her first moves were fast, they were decisive, and they were aimed right at the top, at the leadership structure. She knew you can't execute a transformation with the same team that got you into the mess in the first place. And the pace was just wow. In just the first 3 months of 2025, she brought in an industry icon to start mending fences, created a totally new role to fix relations with local associations, and then replaced both the general counsel and the CFO. Then came the really tough part, getting rid of 61 jobs. This wasn't a slow transition. It was a total overhaul of the leadership team, and it happened fast. And you know what? Wright was incredibly blunt about why she did it. She basically said, look, the people who got us here are not the people who can get us to the next chapter. So we had to dissolve those relationships. It's a tough, unsentimental way to put it, but it was absolutely critical for what came next. All right, so new teams in place, now phase 2 begins. And instead of hiding from the problems or, just putting out press releases, Wright did the exact opposite. She went straight to the organization's biggest critics and just asked for their honest, unfiltered opinions. She called it a feedback mission. The goal was super simple. Find every single point of friction, every single frustration, and really understand it from the member's point of view. It was a smart way to diagnose the illness before you start writing prescriptions. And the feedback she got, oh man, it was brutal. And these aren't my words. These are the exact things brokerage leaders were saying. They saw the old NAR as dysfunctional and financially reckless. They felt it had zero transparency. And this is the big one, that it wasn't accountable to its own members or the industry it was supposed to be serving. So after hearing all of that, what was Wright's big takeaway? This. Her own conclusion was that the organization was, in her words, way more broken than most people even realize. This wasn't just a PR problem. The internal machinery was fundamentally busted. Okay, so you've diagnosed the disease. It's bad. Now what's the treatment plan? This is where Wright and her new team started turning all that painful feedback into a real, concrete, actionable plan for the future. And the plan they came up with was incredibly detailed. I mean, it started with 75 distinct, separate projects, each one designed to tackle one of those deep-seated issues. And then, to keep all that organized, those 75 projects were bundled into 24 specific initiatives. So this wasn't some vague mission statement. It was a super organized, detailed roadmap for change, built so that nothing would fall through the cracks. And here's the really smart part. These initiatives were all grouped into these commitment categories that directly answered all that criticism. People said NAR was financially undisciplined. Bam, a new commitment to disciplined budgeting. They said it lacked transparency. Well, a core goal is now transparency. You can see this clear, direct line from listening to the feedback to taking real action. So, the new team is in place, the plan is in motion, but the hardest part was definitely still to come. The road ahead was going to be the ultimate test for this whole thing. And in a really honest moment, Wright admitted just that. She said this was the hardest thing she's ever done. And you got to remember, this is coming from someone whose entire career is built on difficult turnarounds. It's a personal thought that really shows you the sheer scale and pressure of this job. But even after admitting how hard it is, she makes this incredibly bold prediction. She's not just trying to survive, she's aiming for a complete transformation. She's even putting a date on it, raising the stakes for herself and her whole team. It's a really confident, forward-looking statement that tells you this plan is more than just talk. And that kind of leaves us with this final thought. Nykia Wright's playbook. It's a fascinating masterclass in crisis leadership. But NAR doesn't exist in a bubble, right? It sits right at the center of the entire real estate world. So the ultimate question is whether changing this one massive organization can actually ripple outwards and truly remake the industry it was built to serve. I guess only time will tell.